own values. So, am I getting at the kind of question there? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. Please.
So you can comment a little bit on the government in Africa. My perception, Togo, for example, looks to be more typical than not. And how do you make sense out of all this?
It's not more typical than not. It's certainly an unfortunate case, for sure.
Presidents
Or
who won't leave, all this kind of stuff.
people hang on. There's a
Right.
kind of a sense when President Collins he ruled for 27 years. One party, one state, one man for 27 years. And when the elections came up, when he submitted himself to multi-party elections, a Zambian told me, no good African would kick their father out of the house. Well, as a matter of fact, a lot of good Africans, a lot of good Zambians kicked him out of the house. He only got 25% of the popular vote. And as a good statesman, he stepped down. He didn't call out the army. Nelson Mandela gets elected, could still be ruling today. He said, no, 5 years is enough. I put something in place or so. Mr. Mugabe seems to want to go on and on and on. Botswana, every few years they change. Several other countries, so it varies. And a lot of it is, some will say, well, it's kind of in the African tradition, which is a false word because it's African traditions, cultures, it's a big continent. The leader, the big man, usually a man, hangs around and doesn't leave, or causes problems if he does leave, he's off the scene or something. Julius Nyerere stayed on for a long time, the great founder of Tanzania, and then came a time he stepped down and he stepped back or so. So it varies. But why do we see scenes like, the problems in Togo now after such a long time? Well, because some people hang on. That's why we need good constitutional rule. We put in the Constitution in 1991 two terms only. President Chiluba, because of what he was doing, wanted a third term because of what he was doing. Parentheses, he was robbing the country. He's under arrest. His passport listed. He's on trial for, quote, plunder of the national economy. The second president of the country. Sent shutters up some neighboring presidents to see that a country could do that or so. But he wanted to manipulate the Constitution for a third term. The churches, first of all, said no. We're going to set a standard. Follow the Constitution. And the Law Association, non-governmental groups, he had to step down. He had to pull back. So there is, in different countries, some different dynamics. But it's really sad when you see a dynamic that is eventuated in Togo, or maybe now in Zimbabwe, or some other places.
So if you took a shot now versus 1965, it's hard to generalize. It's so much different. Would institutions be stronger now, generally, and then moving in the direction towards?
Yes. If I took a shot where I arrived in 1989, at that time, I think the figures are something like 35 out of the 40 sub-Saharan states were ruled by one party, military dictator, president for life, or whatever form. Today, it's changed. The wave of change that came. It was called in 1960, the Prime Minister of Britain was in South Africa, and he says a wave of change is sweeping across the continent, the end of colonialism. That same wave of change swept across the continent beginning in 1990, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, with the fall of totalitarianism. One of the reasons we got multi-party democracy in Zambia is our model had been Eastern Europe. And when it crumbled, people said, well, why can't it crumble in Zambia? So there's more hope today, even though you got some bad cases around. 1990 was tougher.
You indicated there's a relationship between all the issues that you talked about and contraception, family issues. What are the bishops in Zambia like with regard to those issues? Because in the United States, we see a real disconnect between Catholic social teaching that has to do with the larger non-personal issues and teaching personal. Could you speak to the Zambian bishops like that? Or how
Well, a couple of things, and I think it's, fair to say a lot of the Zambian bishops would be trained more traditionally but they're very close to the people. They're pastorally close. So they're willing to, certainly in terms of confronting the government and things like that. A good example would be a couple of years ago, a pastoral letter on abortion was prepared, because abortion is legal with some constraints within Zambia. And so they were speaking out. And the first draft was pretty, hard line, very, arresting people who get abortions, doctors who perform things like that. They withdrew that draft. And they put out another draft which repeated the issue about being against abortion, but asked the question, why are women in our country having abortion? What does it say about our education system? What does it say about our health system? What does it say about men and marriages? What does it say about a lot of other things? So they put this issue of abortion within a social context. It's a good letter. On the question of contraception, I would say, if you asked a bishop to give a homily on it, he probably most of them would be, they wouldn't give it. But if they did give it, they'd be more careful of what they were saying and stuff. But I think they would experience what many people around the world experience, is that, the basic teaching of Humani Vitae is responsible parenthood. And that should be promoted. And if it can't be promoted by simply natural means, it may have to be promoted by other means. So the more tricky thing is the issue of condoms in AIDS. And just to say a word about that, is the major thing in terms of any conversation to introduce is the social, or the church's teaching on condoms in relation to contraception. It's very different than the church's teaching, if it had some teaching on condoms, as a prophylactic. Contraception, or a condom can be used as a contraceptive. A condom can be used as a medical thing to prevent spread of disease. One could say, I'm not using this in a marriage situation. My husband has AIDS. I'm not using the condom to prevent children. I'm using the condom not to get infected. And indeed, as Cardinal Lustiger, he just died a few weeks ago, in Paris said, and many others have said, there's a moral obligation in a marriage of divergent, husband or wife infected, husband or wife not infected. It's a moral obligation to use a condom. The condom isn't always safe. As I said, every time I talk about it, I don't speak from experience, but I understand it's not always safe and not always easy to use. And therefore, to say, well, all the problems will be solved by using condoms. No, not at all. But to say, never use condoms in any sense, because the church says no. The Pope has never said no on condoms and AIDS. There's no official teaching on that. But many bishops are saying, well, because we say, Humani Vitae, you can't. But you're not talking about contraception, you're talking about prophylactic use. Now, it has to be very careful. I've said this in terms of Nelson Mandela 2 months ago announced that his son had died of AIDS. And break the stigma. Stigma kills more than AIDS, because people then don't approach the issues. But in 1986, Kenneth Kaunda and his wife announced that their child had died of AIDS. So we've talked about AIDS much more in Zambia than in many other African countries. All kinds of conversations, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But one of the things, and the bishops have put out letters in terms of promoting, abstinence, promoting faithfulness, and addressing the issues of poverty that foster this kind of thing. But we get adverts on the television, lots of adverts. And they're kind of balanced adverts. For instance, one advert is two young men at a bar looking out over the crowd. Oh, that's a pretty good looking woman there. Look around for a pretty good looking woman. That's a pretty good looking woman. Yeah, she's really a sweetie or something. Yeah, well, I think I'm going to meet with her tonight. And the other young man says, yeah, well, just remember, every time he pulls out a condom from her. Every time. Now, what is that promote? As long as you use a condom, you're safe. Then the news for 5 minutes, and then another advert. The other advert is two young men sitting in the bar, and one saying, you're crazy, man. You're just crazy. You're throwing away your future. What kind of a man are you anyway? Have a little sense. Abstain. Otherwise, you're not going to have a good marriage. Wonderful message.